Well, good morning and welcome to the first chairing combined authority meeting. It's a pleasure to be taking my first one. Shall we start by going around the table and just introducing ourselves? So obviously live on stream. Mike, do you want to go?
So Mark Rogers, interim head paid service and chief exec for the combined authority.
And Handley.
Sorry, can you speak up? I can't hear at the back.
Yeah.
Raise your voices, thank you.
Shall I do that again? So
Yes,
Mark
please.
Rogers, I'm the interim head of paid service and chief exec for the combined authority.
I'm Councillor Anne Handley and I'm the leader of East Riding of Yorkshire Council.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor David Tucker, Deputy Leader of East Riding Council. My name's David Gent and I'm the Deputy Chair of the Skills Board.
Louise Hawkins, Hull City Council.
Good morning, Jason Speedy. I'm Chair of the Business Board.
Good morning, everyone. Leo Hammond, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for Humberside, representing Jonathan Everson, Police and Crime Commissioner.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Dad and I'm the Deputy Leader of Hull City Council.
Councillor Michael Austin, Leader Post.
Morning, I'm Julie Nielsen, I'm Interim Director of Finance for the Combined Authority.
I'm Lisa Dixon and I'm the Interim Monitoring Officer for the Combined Authority.
And I'm Luke Campbell, Mayor of Hull and East Yorkshire. So shall we start? Apologies. Do we have any apologies, please?
Jane Anderson as Chair of the Skills Board and I'm deputising for today.
And just obviously Jonathan Everson.
Louise Hawkins.
Yeah, we haven't received any declarations of interest yet, but we might get some during the meeting.
So I think we just go around the table and to check, please, if there are any declarations of interest, just to start. So
Nothing from my side, Mark.
I'll just declare that I'm also an East Riding Councillor, just to make it fair.
No,
No,
Not me.
Nothing. No, thank you.
thank you. Does any member wish to, oh, we've just gone through that. The minutes, would anyone like to move and second the minutes, please?
I'll second.
just confirm that we check.
Thank you for those minutes. I agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Announcement from the mayor's update. This gives me the opportunity to basically say what we've done so far. As you can imagine, it's been probably 2 weeks now been in the office. UK Reef, I was at last week, which was fantastic. Give me the opportunity to speak to investors, pension funds, property developers, to really bring in some investment and some interest into Hull and East Yorkshire. During that time at UK Reef, I had the opportunity to meet with both council leaders, Anne Hanley and Mike Ross, where we sat down together and discussed how we can work together to better the region. And I'd just like to clarify, you've got really two very good, strong leaders that are strong competitors and ready to fight for this region. And including myself, you've got the third one there. So all interest is in bettering this region. So that was a fantastic, productive meeting. I was at the Councils of Nations just before last weekend, where I sat down with the Deputy Prime Minister and also the Prime Minister, talking about skills, housing, education. Very important meeting, very good. Built some good relationships in that meeting as well. So it was very positive from that. I discussed that we've got housing proposals on there where we've got 3 brownfield sites that are in the pipeline. Education as well was on the agenda, where I spoke to a team to capture not just adult education, but also the younger generation from 16, because I think it's very important that we capture that. There's a short gap there where we can be losing interest in the education side of things, and so that was very important. What else? That's literally it. As you say, 2 weeks, a lot to be done, but a lot of positive meetings so far. I've got meetings with my team later today to discuss the direction on where we're going with that as well. So I will keep everybody updated on where we're going and what we're doing as much as I possibly can. But that's where we are so far. Announcements then.
Sorry, Mr Mayor, can I just ask,
Of course.
just for the record, Mr Mayor, we would like the board to approve and agree that the mayor has asked to be known as the mayor for Hull and East Yorkshire. It is a formality, but we would like the board to approve that if that's all right with you, Mr Mayor.
That's cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool.
I will pass over now to Mark Rogers, interim chief exec.
So you'll be grateful to know that I haven't got the announcements to make today. Reserve those maybe for a future meeting, but I think you've heard from the mayor already, and that's given it's his first meeting, I really don't want to add to the announcements today, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Public questions.
Would you like?
Oh, yes, please.
Public questions. We do have one public question today, Mr Mayor, and that is from Mr Washer. And we were going to ask Mr Washer to come and join us at the table, or I think Mr Rose has got a microphone, a roaming mic in his hand, so.
Good morning. My question is for the mayor, and I'd like to know what criteria you use to decide whether or not to support business proposals affecting Hull and East Yorkshire for the development of green energy in whatever form proposals might take.
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. I've consistently supported the region in green energy for local business, creating local jobs. I will keep on that same track. I was brought in by the people of this region. I represent them. If I can create local jobs, help local businesses, that is what I'm here to do. So thank you for the question. I also actually on green energy. On green energy, there's also opportunities to look into other types of green energy as well, which is hydrogen. I know Claire, the mayor of Nottingham, is looking into fusion energy as well, which is very interesting, where they're doing the first fusion energy in the country there. So that's another option to look into, as well as nuclear as well. So I'm just saying, like, across the board, we've got good options, and we're going to explore all of them. So thank you.
Ask Mr. Washer if he has a supplementary.
Mr. Washer, do you have a supplementary
Yes, please.
question?
I know, of course, you served as a candidate under the Reform UK bill, and I'm just wondering whether you see any conflict between what you just said and Reform UK's attitude to green energy.
I have been very vocal on stating that I represent this region and I put them first over any party politics. You know, I've said it on many occasions now, which has gone out online. It's been on the BBC. It's been everywhere. So I've always expressed that I will put this region first over anything. Thank you. Any items of business referred from the last meeting of the Combined Authority, Lisa?
Mr Mayor, I've got nothing to report to this meeting. This is one of the items that will be a standing item on the agenda of the Combined Authority going forward, but nothing to report today.
Thank you. Reports and recommendations from an overview of scrutiny committee of the Combined Authority.
Again, Mr Mayor, nothing to report to this meeting.
Okay. Reports from any other committee of the Combined Authority.
It's a further nil report at this meeting, but we do expect that there will be plenty of business coming forward as due course. Yeah, so Mr Mayor, the next item on the agenda, statutory consents required in relation to the exercise of any function exercised concurrently with the constituent councils. Snappy title for this item on the agenda. The reason it's there is because some of the functions of the Combined Authority can only be exercised with the consent of either East Riding Council or Hull City Council. So in the interest of transparency and to be clear, we're keeping this as a standing item on the agenda. So any requests for those consents will come forward and be discussed at this meeting. So again, today there's nothing to report, but I'm sure as the combined authority gets up and running, there will be items on the agenda in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the main agenda. Adult Skills Fund.
Would you like me to take this item?
Yes, please, Mark.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just ask the monitoring officer to be clear with the board that this is requiring an urgent decision, why and what that means.
Thank you, Mark. So we will be asking the board to identify this as an urgent item. The reason for that is that these skills fund readiness submission must be made to the DFE by the 30th of May. So there can be no delay in issuing that submission, or there is a risk to the combined authority and the combined authority region missing out on funding this year and it being delayed. So we are asking that to be considered as part of the recommendations before you.
Right, thank you. Just before I move on to present the report, which I'm actually going to ask a colleague to do, can I just check that everybody's clear about the nature of the decision?
Yes.
And content with it as such? Thank you. So if I can invite Claire Watts to join, please. Thanks. Do the headlines of the report, the importance and therefore the consequent urgency of it. Claire.
Absolutely. So one of the key budgets that the combined authority will take on will be the Adult Skills Fund. The intention is that we take that on by September 2026 for that academic year. That sounds like a long time away, but fundamentally that means that by this September, we need to give providers clear guidance as to how we intend to do that. So that suddenly compresses our timescale, and it's why the Department for Education are so keen that we should submit our readiness tests to them by the end of this month. It gives us then time to finalise those and time to come back before we have to give kind of clear guidance to providers as to how we do. In terms of the enormous documents that have been submitted as part of that, these papers, predominantly the key thing that's there is the Adult Skills Fund Strategic Skills Plan. So that lays out how Hull and East Yorkshire intends to deliver the Adult Skills Fund. So that's at least £16 million a year, and it's index linked, so it grows every year. So it's going to be one of the biggest budgets that the combined authority operate. So the Adult Skills Fund Strategic Skills Plan is not setting the overall skills plan for the whole combined authority. There will be other elements of skills delivery. And it's tied to quite a tight set of rules in terms of how the Adult Skills Fund can be used, certainly initially. And so we don't think we're tying anyone to anything, but this is the first time in these papers that the skills priorities for the Skills Fund have been presented to the combined authority. So I just wanted to point out that those are new. They've been to the Skills Board last week. The Skills Board were content to endorse those. David's nodding. There were some really useful comments around that in terms of making sure that we recognise the linkages between the 16+ agenda and then the transition to the 19+, to make sure that we look at the needs of people with special educational needs and those who are not in education, employment or training, many of whom have eligible support up to the age of 25 and therefore come into this fund. There was recognition of the complexity of rurality of the area in terms of making sure that people can access education and skills and the difficulties potentially of transport. There were key points about making sure that careers, education, information, advice and guidance are embedded into Adult Skills Fund delivery wherever we do it, and that is written into the priorities. There was a recognition of the link to the Get Britain Working Plan, which the combined authority is required to produce by September, and the importance of making sure that skills opportunities were relevant for small businesses as well as big businesses because of the kind of makeup of our business. But they were all happy to endorse these papers for submission at the end of May. The other key thing that we're asking agreement as part of this submission is the setting our year one intentions that in effect we mirror what happens in September 2025. So if people providing education are doing that through a grant in 25 to 26, that we will maintain that grant from 26 to 27, and that we will have commissioning opportunities similar to those that are available within this academic year. And that's just about recognising the amount of change that's happening and the fact that we don't want to kind of throw everything that's working out. We want a kind of meaningful year of delivery, and then we can start to tweak the rules around how we might deliver. The only thing that we might propose is, at the moment there is a earnings level at which people can access training for free, and there is some suggestion that we slightly make that a bit more generous straight away from year one. It's what's happened in West Yorkshire. It's one of their key deviations from, and it just makes our adult skills fund a little more affordable for a slightly larger number of people. So that's not finalised, but probably by the time these documents are, that would be an intention to move forward. So I think those are the key points within this. The other elements are confirming that we still intend to provide some distance learning. So that's if people want to do online learning or blended learning, and that we intend to allow organisations receiving funding through the Adult Skills Fund to subcontract. So those are two important principles that happen now, and it allows the model to work well.
Any further questions?
Thank you. So yeah, I've got a few points. But first, thank you for the report. So I think the skills agenda is one of the sort of key parts of the evolution sense of being able to do things differently locally to meet local demands, local needs. So I think obviously what Claire's outlined there talks around a process of change rather than revolutionary change in the first instance. I understand the reasons why that. Obviously, I think over time it'd be good to see how this develops for the region. The report talks around support for, it's one of the things I'm sort of quite keen on, so I'm just exploring, but support for ethnic minority groups or certain disadvantaged groups as well. I think that's particularly relevant given the report covers that, but also just issues being fed back to us in the last months around the reason around the news about. So just if it could be expanded upon how we see that playing out over time as well. And I think just also going back to my previous point in terms of just how this expands over time. The report talks around when there is a place that with the ability for it to change as a result of that, just how we expect that to change over time. If anyone's able to outline their views on change from their place now as well.
Mark, you want to say that?
I think I'm going to take
Can I-
yes first.
Okay,
So
so in terms of support for disadvantaged groups, Black minority ethnic people, English for speakers of other languages is a key entitlement through the Adult Skills Fund. So that will always continue as an opportunity. The whole kind of ethos of the Adult Skills Fund is almost one around inclusion and making sure that it's there as a safety net for people who potentially haven't succeeded in their kind of 5 to 18 education. So both councils operate adult education facilities that are welcoming to people who've maybe had trouble. We take stuff out to other places. So the East Riding has the mobile adult learning centre, which is in fact a bus that's been turned into a classroom. We can take it out into rural areas and coastal areas where people are. So the whole kind of ethos and what is inspected through Ofsted. So all adult learning through the Skills Fund is subject to Ofsted, and that kind of inclusive activity and making sure that people are making progress through those lower levels of learning is absolutely embedded into the Adult Skills Fund. There are things that could be changed in terms of eligibility. So I've mentioned kind of eligibility in terms of needing to means testing and needing to pay for training, but there's other stuff in terms of those eligibility criteria, some of which Department for Education would expect to remain, and some of which can be tweaked to a local flavour. So it might be about the types of learning available. It might be about the split between kind of levels 1 and 2. So there's sort of basic levels and then higher level skills at level 3 and above. That might be something that changes. And that's all about conversations with providers and learners and everybody else. The Skills Board will be an absolute key part of that, and that's a kind of cross-sector board, including businesses and learning providers and volunteering community sector, so that we can make sure that everything that we do is what is needed locally. So at the moment, there may be things that Adult Skills Fund says we have to deliver, and we might say, well, actually, the evidence shows there's not the need for that. We could use that money in a different way. But I think that's quite a long-term conversation. And what you want and what we haven't got yet is an overriding skills strategy for Hull and East Yorkshire. We've got the framework that's gone through already, but it's very broad to identify what things do we want the Adult Skills Fund to be able to do to meet the needs of our residents, and therefore what does that look like, and what are all the other things that are going to come along going to do that complement that rather than overlap. So we've got things like Connect to Work due to start in September, which is all about supporting people predominantly with kind of health needs or disability needs to either get into work or remain at work. So that's a good overlap skills fund provision if you're not careful. We've got money that's currently available through the Shared Prosperity Fund, people and skills. And again, we want to make sure that that's complementary, but not leaving gaps. And we need to wait until the end of this, well, the spending review in a couple of weeks' time in terms of what the replacement for Shared Prosperity Fund looks like, and whether that still has a people and skills element within it, to know whether that's carrying on as a kind of a booster for skills or whether it's something different. Obviously Hull has done very well through the skills boot camp funding. That's getting unring-fenced and put into the adult skills fund allocation. So we need to make sure that we keep the learning that's worked really well from skills boot camps. With this year, we're expanding it out quite a lot into East Riding. Beyond that, we need to make sure that we keep that type of provision as well, because it's worked really well. So it's an ongoing conversation fundamentally.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just obviously, firstly, employability and skills from the policing and crime and community safety perspective is really important. If someone's employed, they're less likely to commit a crime, which is our key aim. We picked up a few points reading the papers. We were slightly disappointed that it seems to be very similar to previous economic policies and objectives and priorities we've rehashed in the region over the last 20 years, and does particularly bias larger businesses on the Humber corridor itself. I mean, we have got one of the worst birth rates for small businesses in the country, way below the national average. And I could only find one reference in the entire report to helping businesses set up new businesses, helping local people set up new businesses. And again, from our perspective of trying to reduce crime and improve community safety, a lot of people who end up in prison perhaps don't want to fit into a structured employment system, but they might be actually wanting to set up their own business. And we've got organisations locally like Bud, which Charles Cracknell runs in Hull, who do a great job of supporting young entrepreneurs set up new businesses. So we were just sort of disappointed to not see that as a key strategic priority of the fund.
I think that's where we get the thing of there are so many different funds. So this is very specific, and the rules around what the Adult Skills Fund can be used for are quite specific. So what you're seing here is the provision that is supported by the Adult Skills Fund.
So we can't use the Adult Skills Fund to train entrepreneurs?
There are some courses within, but there are other things that are much better. So the people and skills provision within the Shared Prosperity Fund, for example, is very focused around employability, getting people into work, helping people set up business. And there's a direct link across to the business element of the Shared Prosperity Fund, who are doing similar access. Connect to Work, which I've already mentioned, has a skills element. It has a business engagement element. So it's about supporting businesses to understand how they can employ people who maybe have some additional barriers or additional needs, and to help people to consider entrepreneurship if mainstream employment is not for them. So looking at this is why I'm saying what we would have done, I think, is develop the overall Hull and East Yorkshire skills strategy first, and then looked at the individual funding streams to see which bit was going to go through what, and then you'd get a much more holistic picture. Because we are tied to this timescale of submitting something in 2 days, we needed to bring you this first. So you're seeing a subset of activity when we know that the overall picture is much, much wider. So there's a lot of work still to do, but hopefully you'll
So you
see.
can reassure us that
I
we
can-
will be having a priority in the
Yes.
overall plan to support the creation of small businesses and
Absolutely.
meetings, well, any
Yes.
business.
Yes,
and
and just
helping
to
young
say,
people.
in terms of those statistics, we have a very low birth rate, but we do have a better survival rate than most areas. So we don't create as many, but they last for longer. So, you know.
Yeah. And then just, sorry.
Well, it's just, well, it was sort of a sense of your point about, I think, what I was just going back to my previous question in terms of changes to this plan at the time now the mayor's in place. I appreciate the point about tight timescale and preparation and submission, but when would you expect to see a new iteration of this plan coming forward? Given all that you just outlined there, 'cause it sounds like quite a lot of work to do to get to that point, but like,
Yes.
obviously,
So,
we don't want to
so I
waste
think
time.
we've got a timeline now to get this agreed so that we can take on the funding and deliver the first year. Before you get to the commissioning for September 2027, I would expect that all the things are in place, so in effect by September 26, because we've got to give those indications to providers, that we'd have the wider strategy, assuming Mr. Mayor is in favour of doing that. We'll have that view for the area. We can look at all the streams coming on. We'll have had the spending review, so we'll understand hopefully the next 3 years of central government funding coming in terms of this agenda and others that link to it. And therefore we can then revise. So almost this is a plan for September 26 to September 27 delivery, and before we give intentions in September 26, we will have had to fully revise it to look at how we might want to change. So I think that, but before that, we'll have done the overall skills strategy and understand the bigger picture, so that this then fits as a piece rather than appearing to be our skills strategy, which it's not.
Yeah, I mean, you made a comment saying if certain allocated pots aren't used, potentially go into something else. Is this something it could be used for if it's not used up in?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the opportunity potentially to boost bits of skills delivery through the mayoral investment fund. If there are elements that can't be delivered through any of the funding sources that we know about. So it's a real kind of jigsaw of making sure that we understand what the needs are of the area and that we can identify a funding source to deliver. So one example, I think at the moment that we don't quite know where it's funded from is the lead to gender. So the young people who are not in education, employment and training. There used to be quite a good strand of funding through the European Social Fund to deal with that from 14 up to 18. And that's not within the current shared prosperity allowances. It's not within the adult skills fund allowances. It's difficult to see at the moment where that sits, but what we can see is quite a large rise in the number of people, young people who are not in education, employment and training. We want to be able to tackle it, and the funding isn't obvious yet. So those are the kind of things that we will need to look at very carefully in terms of how we take our skills strategy forwards. It's tempting to think, oh, it's already got the biggest allocation of funding, we don't need to worry about skills, but actually it is, as you've recognised, quite tight in terms of what it can do. We might be able to flex some of that to make it a bit wider, but it might be that we need to make decisions to allocate other funding to specific activities that can't fund through this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Claire's given us a very in-depth look at this recommendations. I listened carefully to the debate, particularly around the deputy PCC's whatever ambitions and things, and Councillor Ross's. But the key to me is this, that we've got 2 days from now that you have to submit, and that gate will not open unless we resubmit. And once that we've resubmitted, those conversations that Deputy PC's brought up today and Councillor Ross brought up, we can have those broader conversations. But I think what we need to focus on here, Mr. Mayor, if I may, is the recommendations before us, because if we don't move the recommendations, these conversations won't be happening anyway. Thank you.
I think we can still have a conversation about some of the strategic priorities in the document. So the other 2 points we picked up on was, obviously we've got 4 prisons in this area, which is quite unusual. We've got a very large prisoner population. Again, we're serious about stopping crime and stopping those people reoffending. We need to try and get them into employment. There's nothing in this document about identifying prisoners as a category of people we need to try and work with to the wider benefit of society, stop them drawing on resources of prisons and police, to actually upskill and re-educate them to go get jobs, or crucially, start their own businesses. So we would have liked to have seen really some reference to prisoners and how we can work with our 4 prisons to use skills funding to benefit the wider region by cutting down on reoffending, which at the moment is something like 60–70%. So it is a serious problem nationally.
So
as well as locally.
that is definitely something we could look at, whether we could include a specific element within the plan before it's finalised. So as I say, we've got to put it into the Department for Education in 2 days' time. They will then come back with their comments. So there will be some changes and flexes being made. So if there are important things that we need to include now, we can add things
If
in
we can
there.
add that, it'd be great, or something along those lines. And the last point from me, which I can't go to any meeting without mentioning, something to do with rurality. Again, I didn't really see a clear understanding of the complexities of the needs of the farming and fishing sectors in this document, which are very different in terms of skills and education to the rest of the industries in our area. So perhaps when it comes back again, some sort of specific strategic priority around those 2 key sectors. I know you said you want to support them, which is great. But I do think they should be looked at differently to the rest of the industries, because they are very different.
Again, possibly not this fund, and we might need to just look at that as to whether it is. Certainly in terms of fishing, there have been announcements this week about a new fund from government to support the coastal and fishing industry that includes reference to skills. So we'll just need to look at our patchwork. But so it might go into this in a bit more detail. It might not. It might be a different stream.
Just on, again, appreciate the process that we're under here and the timescales, and that this proposal on the table essentially keep things as they are and keep it going for a year while flesh out. But just in terms of fleshing out that point, do you expect, given experience elsewhere who are ahead of us, that the skills offer will see new providers coming into the system? Obviously, we've got a lot of very good providers for the system. We need to support them where they do, but do you expect that this approach will see new providers setting up? And also in terms of the skills offer, one of the things we need to do is increase level of skills. So just assessment around process of assessing what skills are needed, to work with business community, work with providers, work with individuals as well, just getting a sense of how much more provision is going to be needed over the next 4, 5, 6 years time as well.
Yeah, so what is happening kind of concurrently to this is the Department for Education are opening up access to us to the data that they have about kind of levels of learning. We've also talked certainly to our children's services, and we're going to do the same with Hull in terms of what they know, because they know kind of numbers in terms of people who are homeschooled, people who are care leavers, people who are NEETs, and we need to make sure that kind of that's all planned in. And that's part of the reason for having the kind of a period of relative stability while that really in-depth analysis of exactly what is this, because up until this point there hasn't been access to that data. Chris and the Skills Hub team have some access and are starting to understand it. West Yorkshire Combined Authority lent us some analysis in terms of what they've done for West Yorkshire. They did for Hull and East Yorkshire, which was really helpful to help inform some of the detail in this strategy. But I think there's a lot more we can do in terms of understanding that level of need and where that is a barrier to providers to do what they feel is needed. But there's also providers will tell us what's needed. It's not always what learners want. And there's that kind of getting the consultation right so that we're hearing from learners and non-learners, because they don't want to. That's a really important thing to understand, and providers and the different kinds of providers. So you've got the adult education services within the 2 local authorities and the kind of further education providers and independent local providers, and some providers, particularly for distance learning, who could be located almost anywhere. And it's just kind of understanding that whole picture and looking at, so yes, you might get new players in the mix coming through, particularly if we identify training that's maybe not been available, or if we don't have the right kind of providers to go into prisons, for example, that might be, or to reach the rural communities, or to reach particular clusters of deprivation within Hull or elsewhere. So I think, you know, being data-led and evidence-led in what we do is going to be so critical but we're only just getting that access to the data that tells us that. So it'll take a bit of time for people to get that baseline in place, and then we can really have an evidence-based plan.
Sorry, just obviously recommendation one is to approve the strategic priorities. Is there a reason right now, 2 days before submission, why we can't alter priority one to include specific reference to farming and fishing, and alter priority 3 to include a specific reference to prison? If the board, obviously I'm not a voting member of the board, but if you guys wanted to, that would be probably an easy way to just make sure those two things aren't forgotten.
There's no reason at all, particularly if recommendation 2 is also accepted, which is that officers can sign off any minor amendments prior to submission.
But that just sets the strategic direction.
Well, it just, sorry, Matt, sorry. But it just to a point, but have I completely misunderstood this? This is the framework, and the devil will be in the detail as we go through working with the skills board.
This isn't quite the framework. There
No,
is a
but
framework.
there is-
This is for the specifically for the skills fund,
Yes.
and it's just whether fishing and farming are particularly relevant to the skills fund. I think the prisons one is probably more correct to add in. I think farming and fishing probably funds elsewhere.
I was just going to say that I was just going to say that there is a rural, and that's how I've understood it. So we need to include prisons, as Leo said, which I would be happy with. But the rural, I think, is a different.
Yeah.
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 Right.
Just to support Councillor Handley, I think skills are absolutely critical for business, all shapes, sizes and sectors. And I think the key piece of work that needs to follow this is the skills strategy, which absolutely is aligned with the economic strategy. So we have an economic framework, we have a skills framework. As businesses, we've been inputting into that. I think that's where we need to capture the different size businesses and the different sectors of business. So between the business board and the skills board, we've got 2 key pieces of work to complete in order to capture all of that data and get all of it.
And just so I have another colleague there, this complexity was absolutely recognised at the skills board and how it relates over to that. And it's pretty fair to say there was a lot of discussion on all these interconnections and other connections to funds that all add up that will make such a difference. But we're not just at that stage yet, it's just about getting this forward to the 30th.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mike. I think probably I'm just saying what most people have said now, but what we really need to do, I think, is move on, as Dave said, today and make sure that we get this through. And then, as Claire's outlined, really, it's the strategy. We need to work on that strategic view with priorities. And definitely, I think if prisons can go into any of those priorities, minorities can as well, specifically. So maybe look at any of them that can go in. And I think what you're saying, Claire, is it really needs to be intelligence led. We need that data. And when we're going through the strategy, I think what we really need to do is make sure that there's that consultation, that we evidence and find what is needed, who does need the skills, what skills are missing, what people really want and are not getting. But also look at where the gaps are, because often we don't find the gaps. So people are falling through there. And I think the intelligence of data is really going to be key to developing the strategy and looking at the bits that people have said today that need to be put in mind. I think the key for us is agreeing today and then working out who's working through the strategy. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the time frame for getting the strategy to this board. Very helpful.
When the questions expire, I'll come in, but let's just see if there's any more questions first. Sounds like. Thank you, Councillor Ross. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. I just want to highlight 3 or 4 points really that I think are relevant to the whole of the debate that you have just had. I think Councillor Tucker said it first, but a number of you followed in, and we just need to get this in. Probably used to officers saying things like that to you, but we absolutely just need to get this in, and it's the start, not the end. I think that's the first thing to say. The other bit I just kind of want to pull out of this conversation, because it's in plain view and hence not being seen, is this is one of the central features of the devolution deal that you do with government. and to secure the devolution of the adult skills funding is worth some recognition today, because you are just about, with some amendment perhaps, to submit a document that actually releases funding that you've long been after. So that's probably the first point that I would make. It's not that the questions and the debate isn't relevant, it's highly relevant. But let's not forget what you've achieved, which is actually the execution of a key element of the deal, and something you would not have had responsibility for or control over hitherto. So I kind of wanted to just kind of really make that clear. I hope that doesn't sound anything other than just reminding everybody of what's in plain view, that this is part of your deal coming to fruition. I think the second thing I want to pick up on is most combined authorities at the point where they've had this opportunity to take this funding on have, and Claire, these are my words, not yours, but have taken a kind of strategic decision to have a relatively safe handover in the first year. And I think it is important to say that, because the commissioning that comes with this funding is potentially quite a disruptive process, especially if there are new priorities that the combined authority kind of comes up with that will require the decommissioning or the recommissioning of existing services from providers and colleges and the like. So I think steady-ish state is not a bad idea for the first 12 months. And as Claire has said very clearly, 25-26 is taken care of in this report. It's what comes from 26 onwards, I would say, that's really kind of where the disruption to the system might come from. So it's probably a good idea not to be changing too much now, but to be really clear what changes need to come. Which leads me to the third point. On March the 5th, so before you started as the mayor, this board had its inaugural meeting and it agreed to the draft skills strategy. And it agreed to it on the basis that the mayor would then lead a piece of work with this board and others, looking at what the longer term skills strategy needed to be. Claire, Deputy Chair of the Skills Board, and others of you have kind of noted that this particular piece of work nests within a larger piece of work, which is that strategy. So whether it's fishing or any other sector that is particularly germane to this part of the country, the opportunity to actually see priorities reflected in the way that you're talking about is actually through the revision of the skills strategy, I would suggest. So it's sort of jam tomorrow, but to come to your point, Councillor Ross, so when does the jam turn up? The mayor has just started, but has already initiated, so just put their thumb up, but I think that's not for me, has initiated a process of being clear, I think, on what your overall approach to prosperity for the region is going to look like. That will clearly include this review of the skills strategy. And I would imagine over the summer, going into the autumn, and not quite making all of these dates up as I go along, but we will start to get some real clarity about what that strategy looks like and what the skills element of it looks like. And I can't imagine that the mayor or you would want that strategy to take 12, 18, 24 months. We needed to take 6, broadly speaking. So there's that opportunity. And then finally, because this is a new combined authority that's just starting to exercise its responsibility around devolution. The mayor has referred earlier in this meeting to having been to the Council of Mayors on Friday, along with the Council of Nations and Regions. And one of the things that mayors, including our mayor, reinforced with government and in other fora, is that this is the start of devolution, and actually 16+ skills funding is the big prize for this combined authority. Adult skills funding is the start, but I've not worked with or been alongside any other combined authority, including now this one, where the mayor hasn't wanted all of the skills funding, including whatever the apprenticeship levy might eventually turn into. So I think also just to be clear that actually when we do a skills strategy, what sits alongside that is continuing to advocate really strongly with other mayors, as our mayor is doing, for all of the skills funding, so that you've got a holistic skills strategy against which all of the investments that you might want to make against the priorities that are right for this region can take place. So some of that I am clear is not today, but tomorrow. But there is some very clear intent in the decision in March to agree the draft skills strategy is the opportunity for the mayor now to run with that, with you and others, to make sure all of the sectors that the evidence supports for investment in get that investment.
Again, just in terms of responding to my question, I think that's helpful just in terms of knowing when we're likely to see that, because of course, as has been discussed here,
Yeah.
that report will then outline the potential changes to this framework as well, so it'd be helpful to see the plan on that.
So, Mr. Mayor, I do need to agree with Mr. Mayor exact timelines, but I think what I'm trying to give you is a clear view of the Mayor's early intentions here, which is to run with the things that you agreed in March, because it wasn't just the skills strategy either. And for those to get really kind of well developed over these coming months, so that going into the autumn, I think through the forward plan, we have the opportunity to bring reports on the kind of big strategic pieces, the skills strategy being one of them.
Is everyone content enough to approve this report?
Yeah, I'd like some of the recommendations.
And I will second that.
And that's a recommendation with this slight tweaking of the wording as it is. Yeah.
About
Would
prison.
you like me to clarify the wording there, or no? Because I appreciate the proposal was put forward, and obviously that will need to come through the voting members of the board. So the proposal, I think, and bear with me if I haven't quite caught this, and Claire, I'm also looking to you to make sure that this is correct from the point of view of the particular report, that you're looking to amend recommendation 2.1 to include strategic priorities, including work within the prison, within prisons, within the combined authority regions.
Yeah.
With that, give
That's
it
my
back to
understanding.
what you're requesting. So that's an amendment. I'll just repeat it again into clause 2.1 to improve the approach set out in the ASO strategic skills plan, and specifically the following strategic priorities, including work with prisons within the combined authority region.
To reduce free offending.
If you
Just sounds better.
What you said initially.
right,
Yeah.
so you will
Yeah.
go with that then,
Yeah.
and with presume councillor Dudley seconded that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that, though, if there's consensus within the room, then.
Yeah, no, I agree, yeah.
Right. Okay, move on to number 1.
Right. Following these Yorkshire investment plan principles, I will hand over to Mark Rogers, Alex Rogers.
Yeah, so we have apologies from Alex
Yeah.
today, who is otherwise committed. So I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with me making this report, if that's okay. Well, it has to be okay, otherwise somebody else is just going to get random. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. You've had the papers in advance. I hope the report is pretty much self-explanatory. So I'll just make a few comments and then leave time obviously for questions or further comments from the board. Again, this is a combined authority that's done a fair amount of pre-work before it came into formal existence. And two really important pieces of pre-work that relate to these investment principles are that it already has an approved assurance framework. So that went into government some months ago. And an assurance framework is essentially a set of rules by which investments will be determined and made. So you're already starting from a strong base in that you have an agreed assurance framework with government. In other words, government agrees that the governance of this board and this combined authority is sufficiently robust that it can already start to make investment decisions. So to kind of want to remind board and those in the gallery that this is not a standing start. Some very important work has already taken place. Further to that, also, prior to the formal institution of the combined authority, a board that comprised of leaders and other had done quite a lot of work on a strategic economic framework. So there's a set of principles that also derive from that framework, which help provide the kind of context for or the backdrop to these specific investment principles. So two very important pieces of work that have already been done. I'm sure they will be developed further, but you've got a pretty sound basis on which to consider this report. The importance of this report is that it starts to get to the specifics of the rules of the investment game that you want to play in Holland East Yorkshire. So what particularly do you want to be using by way as a rule book of deciding how investments are made? And this isn't just in relation to the overall investment fund, the 30-year fund that has been granted to the combined authority. although it is of particular relevance to that money. But there are other funding streams, we've just heard about one, haven't we? There are other funding streams that are coming into or have come into the combined authority, which will need to have this kind of rule put alongside them, to ensure that they're being made in a way that you as a board, and with the mayor in particular, are comfortable that that's the kind of frame of how the money's going to get spent here. So all I was then going to add to that was just some very little kind of highlighting about specific principles that are being proposed to the board today and that we're asking you to support. And I think they really are important. I don't wish to make too much reference to this, but I have experience of working in other combined authority areas. And one of the things that that experience tells me in particular is that the first principle about being strategic is crucial. So the investment fund and other funding coming into the combined authority is designed to leverage some significant regional impact. It's not designed to put flowers on roundabouts, just to kind of, you know, make a somewhat kind of, you know, disingenuous comparison. It's absolutely designed to go into those things that are going to make the most difference to the region. So hence the first principle in here is very much about being strategic around that investment and using the evidence that this combined authority has to make those decisions as well. That's not to disregard politics, because there are also political imperatives, the mayors, the board as a whole. There will be things that I think from a political perspective you want to drive as well, but if it's in that strategic context, then what we move away from is some of the challenges that other combined authorities have faced around pepper potting their funding on far too small a set of initiatives that actually don't have impact. So that's kind of the first point I wanted to make in here. And then that it relates to the fourth principle in here around scale. So if you're making strategic investments in relation to those things that have the most beneficial impact around prosperity for the communities of this area, you absolutely want to be doing that at scale. You want the most number of people to benefit at any given time for any particular intervention that you make. And then I think probably the last principle might also be the most important one. You've heard the mayor talk about the importance of working collaboratively with the board, with a wider set of partners. You know, you've very much heard him speak about his experience at the investment event in Leeds last week, where he met with Councillor Handley and Councillor Ross and talked about how that collaboration will deliver the better results for the region. The fifth principle is about collaboration, and using this board and its business board and its skills board and wider network to kind of get a sign up to what's the evidence saying, what priorities therefore should be funded, and in what sequence is crucial work, and kind of taking that collaborative approach is what will also make, I think, this combined authority a successful entity, where that's baked in. So where collaboration leads to investment of scale against really important and really strategic objectives, you get the biggest, sorry, I'm going to say it, aren't I, but the biggest bang for your buck. So I don't want to say anything more about the report. Very happy to take questions and comments. And at some point, the mayor will then ask if you're prepared to agree either what's in the report or some version of it. Mr. Mayor, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, with Mark's that like this report isn't. So obviously it's an asking to do anything. I don't think it's asking to agree with the principles rather than actual practical decisions. I think the principles that Mark outlined there is correct. I think so. Me, I'm content with this approach that's being outlined. Key thing for me is twofold. One, builds on, as it said, a lot of work's been done already between the council, so it should focus, and others, has set the region up to be in a strong place now to build upon that and get the investment into the region. I think that is really important to underline for me. The other aspect of it, in terms of getting the four themes that are based on the needs of the region, working alongside business community and others, I think it's just important to reflect what those themes are: enhancing connectivity. People recognise the transport issues, increasing productivity. I think also around recognising on that one, around that this is around our contribution to transitioning to a zero carbon economy and the importance of that for this region and the important role that this region has. The role that this combined authority will have around that agenda as well, but then also around when it comes to issues around promoting inclusivity and sustainable future as well. So yeah, I think the fact that it is built on an agreed approach between councils and the region and the people in the region with what's been done to get to this point, and how it can take the next level. I'm content to move the recommendations and let you agree with the recommendations here today.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I agree with you, Mike. I think it's really important that we work collaboratively. I think, and that is in there, and I think that's the way that this region will grow and prosper, by all of us working as one for the greater good of the region. I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. We need to do that. It's really important to collaborate, and I am really happy. I've read all this, and I think it's a really good piece of work. And I'm really happy with it, and I absolutely would, if you're moving it, Mike, I'm very happy to, sorry. I'm sorry, did you want to?
No, sorry.
Oh, well, I was just gonna say, I'm very happy to second, this is where this will go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 points from us. Obviously, the strategic principle and the targeted principle refer to the transport system, particularly around low carbon transport and sustainable transport. Could we just look at including some sort of transport safety in there as well? Because both local authorities and the police have adopted Vision Zero as a strategy to try and reduce road deaths, which is a big issue in this area. So any work the mayoral officers around transport, could we please include an element of a strategic priority of making sure we're looking at road safety too? And also including that in terms of buses, trains and taxis, transport safety, particularly for women and girls, but also generally around the nighttime economy. So there could be some reference to that, and that'd be great. And then just as a general principle, a lot of strategic policies and plans in this area tend to refer to the geographic spread of the region between rural, urban and coastal communities. That's not put in this document specifically. So like our police and crime plan does reference that because the public like to see it, just to be reassured that, again, all those communities will get their fair share. So if there's any way we could look to include that, that'd probably be quite good for the public as well, just to reassure them.
Yeah, very, very happy with it, and as a second one answer, the only point I would raise on collaboration, given that Humber collaboration in particular has been called out as part of the devolution deal, whether we should specifically mention that under the collaboration vote was my only point.
I support that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a
Very good point.
I mean, it won't be for every single item for economic investors, but there'll be times when it does make sense.
I think specifically as it's a collaboration topic, I think it would be
And I think it's
good to
in
call that out
collaboration
as
very
well
well.
as a specific.
I want to comment just on the PCC's remarks. So very happy to make some more explicit reference to transport safety to full extent as you've articulated in there. Maybe I'm being very picky with your words on your second comment. I would caution against kind of a mindset of fair shares. In that some places have inadvertently gone down the road of hypothecating their investments by area or town or city or whatever. And so it's me being picky, I suspect, with your words, because I'm not sure that that's what you actually meant. But I want to be really clear that these principles are about recognising through evidence when the biggest bang for the buck will be achieved. Now, it is to be expected that that will benefit coastal, rural, suburban and urban communities, but I would caution against trying to even just loosely segmenting the investment funding into those kind of categories. The evidence will lead the investment rather than saying, let's have some rural investment, let's have some coastal investment and then apportion investment funding.
I think to be fair, I wasn't saying you should segment it in 3/3. It was more just to reassure people that those 3 different types of communities will be considered, because with all due respect, historically that's not always been the case, and particularly coastal communities and rural communities have been left behind. So I think definitely those of us who pushed for the devolution deal did make sure we had to really reassure the rural and urban the rural and coastal communities they wouldn't be forgotten about. So just some sort of that the mayor will make sure those communities are not forgotten.
Yeah, well, it was a massive part of my campaign to make sure that stand for everybody. You know, we're in a diverse area with coastal, rural and city centre, so this is, it will, my reputation that's on the line here, I've got to stand up for everybody.
Good, thank you.
Right, so is everyone happy to? Oh, sorry.
One comment, really quickly. Really support the principles and the themes within it. I think it's really just as important that we monitor, and there's the assurance that we adhere to it, that we stick to those principles and we stick to those themes when we're making decisions. And I think that would cover what Lee was really talking about, that if it really is proven that we're doing it that way, then there wouldn't be that feeling that anybody's left.
Yeah, I actually think Leo made a great point about the safety nighttime practice, you know, for our women and girls, you know, that are travelling on buses and whatever else. So I think that's a great point, and I actually brought that up last Friday in Westminster as well, about some sort of vetting as well for the taxis. So I'm already on that.
Thanks.
So, Mr. Mayor, again, just to comment, I'll take.
Well,
Thanks a lot.
I mean,
And I'll come back. Yeah.
I mean, I agree in principle what you said, where it fits more around as a point of transport, rather necessarily investment. It's more the.
Well, I was going to raise it on the transport paper, but I did notice in these investment principles, there is reference to transport in terms of sustainability and improving, it just says improving transport infrastructure. So I did think it kind of fit. It's a plus, but I was going to raise it again on the transport. Right.
Maybe we don't need to now.
Well, I heard
So let me just comment back to Councillor Dad. So one of the other things that gets developed as well with the mayor and with this board, I guess, is a set of outcome metrics. And I think that's where we might start to find precision around how we make decisions about where the investment's going and how we then understand whether they're making that we want them to have. So actually, to the Deputy PCC's point, it may well be that attached to these sort of relatively high level and relatively straightforward investment principles are a set of prosperity related outcomes. And they can absolutely relate to public safety, for example. I'm sure they should. We haven't got that set of metrics yet. But I think, again, that'll be part of the strategy that the mayor wants to develop, and bringing those together with investment principles, I think, will help sharpen up whatever it is that goes forward to business cases. So maybe I'm slightly reversing out my earlier comment, which is not necessarily to amend the investment principles, to make it really clear in minutes that there'll be a set of outcomes that this combined authority works to, and included in those are almost going to be ones relating to how the investments and actions that the mayor takes through this board impact on public safety, and particularly those aspects that you've referred to, whether it's safety of girls and women, or more generally, just, you know,
I do think,
reassurance.
because obviously specifically low carbon sustainable transport is mentioned, it'd be useful just to put the word safe in there as well.
Yeah.
Because, well, road deaths in this area are sadly increasing, so it is a major problem at the moment, which should be a priority for everyone to address.
If there's any particular areas that are higher than usual, then we start by tackling them first.
Yeah.
Is everyone content enough to agree the report?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just clarify that the amendment that is being requested there to the principles, was it a separate principle that referred to safe?
I think you can include it in either the strategic one or the or the targeted one. Both of those refer to transport. To either of those.
So we could include something, so under the strategic one, you look at one of the fourth strategic things for action set out in the whole of East Yorkshire economic framework, and further include transport safety and public safety generally.
Yeah.
Would that work for that one? As an amendment. And then the other one that I just picked up was you wanted to look at collaboration also across the wider the region as part of an amendment to that one as well. So yes, acceptable. Yeah.
So moving on to transport, combined authority transport funding 25-26. I will hand over to Julian on this one.
Thank you, Chair. So at the inaugural meeting of the combined authority on the 5th of March, the indicative budget was established, including the funding streams that have been confirmed at that time. Since that meeting, we've had confirmation of transport funding stream from the Department of Transport. So the core purpose of this report is to add those funding streams into the budget and establish the principles of how those will be allocated. If we just walk through section 4 with the report, which sets out the details. So the combined authority is now the local transport authority for the area. So the Department for Transport is routing the grants through the combined authority. There's 3 funding streams been announced, and as the combined authority is in a statutory transitional year in 25-26, transport powers are being held concurrently with the constituent councils. And the proposal is that capital elements of the grants are allocated back to the constituent councils in the same proportion that the grant awards were issued by the DfT, and that the revenue element of the funding remains with the combined authority to set in place the transport staffing resource for the new organisation. So the first grant is the local transport grant. That is a 1-year capital fund. When we talk about capital, that is about investment in infrastructure, particularly around renewals, maintenance and enhancements. It is for 1 year only, as we've set out at paragraph 3.2. So really, in order to deploy that within the next year, it needs to be allocated quickly to projects, and those will tend to be smaller projects because we need to get on with spending it this year, rather than multi-year schemes. So it will really be about relatively small projects or enhancing something that's already in train. As we set out 4.6, the purpose of the funding is to deliver local transport infrastructure schemes in line with the area's local transport priorities. And the capital funding grant totals 15,631,000, with the DfT's allocations split £7,090,000 and £148 to East Rhine and Yorkshire Council, and £8,541,423 to Hull City Council. The next grant is the integrated transport block funding. That is a funding stream that is paid to authorities every year, again to support capital investment in the local transport network. It's a total of 3.9 million award for 25-26, and DfT's allocations of that 3.9 million are 1,653,000 to East Rhine Yorkshire Council and 2,247,000 to Hull City Council. And finally, the local transport resource allocation. So the resource allocation is really about supporting operational spending to support the delivery of that project, principally around the staffing resource that's needed to set those things in train. So whilst the delivery of the capital projects would be with the constituent councils, it's proposed that the revenue element, so this local transport resource allocation, is retained with the combined authority to support transport staffing costs. And that funding stream is 634,000 for 25-26. So if I take you to the recommendations, so it's recommended to the board that the capital funding settlement. So 2 funding streams, the local transport grant and integrated transport block funding, and the local transport resource funding are accepted and included in the respective capital and revenue budgets of the combined authority. And the 634,000 revenue allocation of the grant provided by the local transport resource funding is retained to help support transport staffing costs for the combined authority. And it's then recommended to the Mayor that the principle of distribution of the capital element of the DfT settlement for 25-26 to allow the DfT local authority allocations to be paid to the constituent councils is approved. So totaling up those funding streams I mentioned earlier, that will mean £10,788,423 will be transferred to Hull Council, and £8,743,148 will be transferred to East Rhine and Yorkshire Council. Further recommended that the principle that other transport grants that may be received and defrayed in the current financial year, so 25-26, are allocated to the constituent councils based on the formula provided by the DfT is agreed. And finally, the interim monitoring officer, in consultation with myself as the interim Section 73 officer, is authorised to prepare and enter into appropriate grant funding arrangements with the constituent councils for all transport grants received during the current financial year. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question on 2.2 really, how is that going to act? So the revenue from there to be allocated to transport staffing, I'm not quite sure how that will work across the capital. I understand the capital spend, because obviously I understand what we're doing there, but it's how that will be managed, how does it work?
So what we're saying is, but for the time being, we keep it with the combined authority. Obviously, we're setting up a new organisation. Staffing costs around transport are still being established, and indeed some of the staffing costs around transport still stick with the constituent councils.
Yeah.
So it's just keeping it here for now while we actually work out and agree with the constituent councils how those staffing arrangements are going to work. So that there'll no doubt be some staffing costs that sit with the combined authority. There may still be some that sit with constituent councils. So it doesn't mean that 634,000 will remain with the combined authority indefinitely. It's just while we work out the staffing arrangements around that.
I think it's just not the urgency, but the reason that we're looking at the capital spend quickly, so we're doing smaller projects and making sure we deliver on capital. If we haven't got the revenue back up in the constituent authorities, then some of that capital spend and movement might be held up slightly. So it's just really how quickly we have that roll where from the combined authority down to support those capital programmes that each constituent authority is delivering.
Yeah, and that is that there is existing transport staff in place in the constituent councils. This is very much going to be around, because there's that need to spend the majority of the funding within 1 year. It's going to be mainly things that have already been worked up and are in train, or will be able to be worked up in a relatively short time. So it really is looking at the combined authority in terms of its staffing, in terms of transport priorities, but working with those existing staff which are funded within constituent councils. But then it may be that some of those costs around that work are recharged into this budget.
And sort of the timescale on that, when do we think we might have some clarity on whether some revenue funding will come into the different authorities to support those capital programmes? Would it be funding for staff that are already there, or would it be looking for extra resource that might be needed?
So at the moment, one of our urgent projects is establishing the service level agreements with the constituent councils around the work that's being undertaken. So we really want to get that in place and principles agreed early summer really. So we're looking over the course of the next few weeks of getting those down, and then that will give clarity for all around the different costs that sit with each of the three authorities and how those come.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, again, if we can have road safety and transport safety as one of the principles of the transport funding, that would be fantastic. But just on the back of Councillor Dad's point, because I read that and I was slightly confused too. So just to clarify, the 634,000 is not going to be used to establish a third transport team. Obviously, we've already got two, one in each council. It's not going to be used to establish a third one, is it, Julie?
I think I want to be careful around.
Is it going to be used for the combined authority to support the other two?
So what I'm saying is we still haven't worked out those arrangements yet. So whether staff will eventually sit with the combined authority or not is yet to be worked through. But what we don't want to do is over-resource what we need to do in terms of support delivery of the transport programme, make sure that the resource sits in the right place, and that those arrangements are agreed with the constituent council. So we're not getting 634,000 just to spend more money than we currently invest necessarily on support that transport programme.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I'm maybe oversimplifying this in my head, but I just want to make sure I'm right. Julian, this is a 1 year look at the funding, because it says here 25-26. And my understanding is that we're going to passport the funds back on the mayor now. So that allows each authority to continue with their scope of work and plans of work. But actually you want to keep some money back because moving forward after 26, 27, you may have that need to build a team in the mayoral authority should you need. Am I right, or am I?
We would expect that some of these funding streams would recur in future years.
Yes.
We need clarity over that.
Yeah.
So it really is about deploying as much of this funding as possible within the current year. The resource allocation, once we've worked out those arrangements, and if there's ability to do so, it may be that we can forward some of that.
And if we don't passport the money back, then the plans works in each authority will continue because they ain't got the money to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I am content with the proposals in the report, but I'm going to use this item just as a means to raise a different issue around transport. When we did the devolution deal, one of the key things we've written there is around rail electrification. That was agreed under the previous government, signed off by the new government, but not had any movement government in terms of reaffirming the commitment to that proposal. So the theme that's on the back of this is to write to the relevant Minister Secretary of State for Transport and just reinforce the need for that to happen and to get from them a commitment to it happening, and again sending out the path to making it happen, working with the private authority. Now we've got authority in place. I see Mark nodding, so
Yeah.
arranged.
So Mr. Mayor, so very happy to draft something for the mayor to share with the board on that point. I think it's important to state clearly actually at this meeting that there are a set of both agreed and draft strategies already out there that have some of these things in them. I mean, obviously you'd expect the mayor to review them, but rail electrification kind of appears to be a touchstone for a considerable number of interests around the area. And I'm sure an opportunity not just to write to the road, but potentially to invite them to come have some dialogue with the mayor and the board would be, I think, a really helpful thing to do, especially as a new mayor is probably going to get a little bit more minister time than some of the established mayors who are around with them already.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Can I just ask, the White Rose Agreement,
Yes.
it just refers to the electrification there, doesn't it?
Yes.
I am right.
And transport all across your.
Transport bus, yeah. So it is actually in there as well, that I do believe it is put to as well now as part of the four Yorkshire Mills.
That's right.
So-
We've got a meeting this week on that.
Yeah, I thought I'd read.
Possibly.
Thank you.
But yeah, so welcome. Everyone happy, content to approve that funding?
Yeah.
Transport, right?
Yeah.
Well. Okay, Julie, you want to take over on this?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So again, at the inaugural meeting on the 5th of March, there was consideration of a pay cut on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund for 25-26 and how that will be allocated to the constituent councils. What this report just sets out again is going from 4.3. So the combined authority was awarded a total figure of just over £9.4 million, including just over £6.5 million as revenue funding. And that was in line with the allocation methodology published by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And we've set out the proportions of that funding in the table just above paragraph 4.4 between Hull and East Riding. What's emerged when those funding allocations were announced was that the overall revenue funding allocation for UK SPF has reduced significantly across two areas, and you can see in the table there at 4.4 that the Hull administrative area was awarded 19% less than the previous year, and East Riding was awarded 48% less. So in the paper submitted to the combined authority meeting on the 15th of March, there was a series of options on how UK SPF programme could be delivered and how the overall allocations could be split. And it was agreed to implement option 3, which apportioned the overall revenue figure into the separate allocations for Hull in the East Riding based on that MHCLG methodology. So again, the table at the top of page 147 were the allocations that were agreed. That option also included a recommendation for the East Riding Yorkshire Council to seek a supplementary revenue allocation from the Mayoral Investment Fund to help bridge the funding gap between MHCLG's methodology and an allocation had it been based on an equal split between the constituent areas of that £6.5 million worth of funding. So you can see in the table at the top of page 148, the proposal is to allocate from the Mayoral Investment Fund an extra £497,516 to take East Riding's revenue allocation up from just under 2.8 million to what would represent half of £6.5 million worth of funding, so just under 3.3 million.
Mr. Mayor, can I just jump in? I'm just a bit confused. You talked about option 3. Yeah. Can't see it in the papers.
Option 3, sorry, was in the previous report that came.
You never said that.
So sorry about that. Option 3 was in the previously. Right. But this paper's 2 options.
Okay, that's fine.
Right.
Thank you.
So at 410, the report sets out that the reduction to the fundings has had a significant impact on East Riding's ability to maintain delivery of some of the key services and activities it supported during the previous year. And the current level of available revenue funding, so the £2.8 million allocated, the majority of that will mean that East Riding can only run for a period of 9 months in terms of the reduced activities it's planning to put in place. And the additional allocation will allow it to run a full programme right through until March 2026. So section 7 sets out the 2 options, which is essentially to approve the request for additional allocation of £497,516 from the Mayoral Investment Fund for the East Riding's UK SPF programme 25-26, or to reject the request. So that is reflected in the recommendations at section 2. So I'm happy to take any questions. If there's any questions around deployment of the funding, we may wish to invite my colleague Claire Watts back to the table.
I haven't got any questions, but obviously I would like to go with recommendation.
And I would very happily support recommendation.
Just to add, sort of, obviously having been at previous meeting and been involved in discussions around this issue, last month, to understand the principles around what's being done. Obviously, the UK SPF funding used by a number of organisations in daily ways, and secondly, to speak to organisations whole who were affected by this, the severe pressure they were put on because of the issues at the time around not knowing about what's covering themselves. I understand what's being out there. I think just picking up all sorts of Hugo's point earlier around how the power is allocated. We're sort of establishing a principle here. There may be occasions when we need to do similar displays of wholesale in the future in terms of how funding is used to bridge a gap elsewhere. So yeah, this in a sense is a one-off, but it should be looked at as a potential principle that we may need to explore further down the line as well.
I agree. Supporting that pragmatism in the future.
Yeah. Do we have any further questions? No, everyone's happy to approve it? Perfect. Move on. The renewable funds Mike, do you want to take over on this?
I will, but Harry is also here, who will give a much more informed view of where we are with this particular bid. Harry, over to you, please. Would you just introduce yourself to the board so they know, you probably are known, but just in case, and they'll be people in the gallery who don't know who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, all. I'm Hyde Ross. I'm the Net Zero Coordinator within the Hull and East Yorkshire Business Growth and Skills Hub, which is one of the organisations that works across both the Hull and East Yorkshire regions, formerly the Local Enterprise Partnership. The report is largely, as Tim, I just wanted to stress a few of the key points at today's meeting. So in addition to the funding that the Combined Authority has access to through the devolution deal, such as the Adult Skills Fund we've heard about already today, the board will be aware that the Combined Authority can also choose to apply for additional external funding from bodies including but not limited to central government where the opportunity arises, such as grant funding calls. The Mayoral Renewables Fund is one of these such grant funding call opportunities. So in late March, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, on behalf of Great British Energy, announced and opened the Mayoral Renewables Fund. It's a £10 million national grant funding pot aimed specifically at combined authorities, so local authorities weren't permitted to apply for it, it was only combined authorities. And it provides capital grant funding for the installation of renewable energy generation projects on public sector land and or buildings within the current financial year, so by the end of March 2026. This is one of the first instances of Great British Energy making funding available to the public sector, and it's very much intentioned as them setting out the stall that they want to work with combined authorities going forward. They want this to be sort of their launching pad for work within local and regional government. The funding itself allows for each of the 14 combined authorities in England to submit one primary application and up to 2 supplementary/extension applications each. The primary application had a limit of £700,000 of grant ask, with the note that if the primary application met the eligibility criteria set out by government, that they would commit to funding that in full. For the supplementary applications, government would score all of those applications from all of the 14 combined authorities against each other on the application questions set out in the relevant forms, and they would fund the highest scoring application questions with whatever money is left over, having already allocated money to the primary applications. So if all of the primary applications from all 14 combined authorities got the full 700 grand, that would leave, my maths is right, a couple £100,000 left over that might be put into one of the supplementary projects or a couple. But if many of the combined authorities choose to dip below that £700,000 max in their primary, there would be additional room for the government to allocate towards more supplementary applications. The combined authority obviously doesn't own any of its own land or building at present, so we sent out a call for projects to our local authorities, asking for those projects that would be eligible and could be delivered within this financial year. Both local authorities put 3 projects forward for us, and these were reviewed by a 3-person panel, comprising myself, colleagues from the Business Growth and Skills Hub, and colleagues from the North Eastern Yorkshire Net Zero Hub. And we reviewed those 3 projects on strategic alignment, cost and benefit, and deliverability to ensure that what we were putting forward to government was something that we were confident that we could deliver, would be beneficial for the people of this region, and in the case of the supplementary applications, would be more likely to be accepted of that scoring process. And you can see the outline of those projects and their scores and the tables on 5.5 and 5.6 in the report. To ensure that both local authorities were awarded some funding from this, we committed to creating a primary application that would be split 50-50 between the 2 local authorities, comprising the highest scoring project for each of them. We felt that was the fairest thing to do, especially given this is the first instance of such a funding programme going through. So for East Riding, that was their solar carport scheme, and for Hull, that was their corporate rooftop solar scheme. Now, in the original proposals, the numbers didn't quite align to £350,000 grant ask each, but both local authorities committed to upping their match funding to create that perfect 50-50 split. As such, we submitted a primary application of £700,000 with £350,000 going to East Riding for those solar carports at 9 sites, £350,000 going to Hull for rooftop solar at 8 sites, the match funding I've outlined in the report. These projects combined would result in an energy bill saving across 25 years in the region of £3.8 million, which could be used on other vital council services. Again, for the sake of of fairness to both local authorities in submitting the supplementary applications, we chose to submit one pair authority, so one East Riding supplementary and one Hull supplementary. The Hull, this was their community centre rooftop solar and battery project. This project requests £522,000 of grant funding for the installation of solar rooftops and battery storage at 7 community centres and similar buildings like libraries. And this is a project that over its lifetime of 25 years would save energy bills in the region of £660,000. For East Riding, the supplementary was the South Cliff Holiday Park Solar Extension Project. So this is an extension to an existing small ground mount solar at the South Cliff Holiday Park near Bridlington. Again, this is one where we've tweaked slightly from what was originally put in and what's in those tables on 5.5 and 5.6, because it wasn't going as a primary application. East Riding suggested that we up the amount we were requesting for as grants, which we did. Therefore, this project asks for £400,000 for the expansion of this solar. This project then would result in an energy bill saving of £2.5 million over the course of its 25-year lifetime. And again, that's money that can be pumped directly into that holiday park or other council services, helping to drive the tourist economy in and around Bridlington. Remaining projects in that table of Hull's corporate battery storage and East Riding's Rawcliffe Bridge solar extension were not progressed and don't form any part of any of the applications we've submitted. Having discussed the Mayoral Renewables Fund application process with colleagues in other combined authorities, we know that our process of deciding how to put projects forward was very similar to what others have done, so we're not outliers here in any way. Mr. Mayor, I know you have a keenness on the jobs associated with renewable energy projects. It's also very prevalent in the application forms from Great British Energy that they and the government have that keenness as well. At present, it's very difficult to estimate job creation, job safeguarding from these sorts of schemes within the energy industry, particularly locally. However, we will be using this project as a cornerstone to assess the number and quality of jobs associated with solar projects, so that the combined authority, the local authorities, and any other partners going forward can learn from us in terms of how to maximise and ensure job creation and job safeguarding through the use of these sorts of schemes. In addition, of course, to those very significant energy bill savings over a long period of time. Now, we were expecting to be told of the outcome of our applications by government on the 16th of May. However, unfortunately, they have had to delay this announcement. At present, we are not able to confirm the outcome of our primary or supplementary applications. However, due to the tight timeframe, and I repeat, delivery within this financial year, and the complexities and timescales required for renewable energy generation project delivery, we feel it's really important that we can begin the legal and governance process now to ensure we maximise the time available for that on-the-ground capital delivery. Therefore, the recommendations we've put forward are worded in such a way that regardless of what the outcomes are from government in the coming weeks, the recommendations are suitable for us to progress. Those recommendations are to delegate authority to the monitoring officer to accept the funding awarded from Department of Energy Security up to the amount that we've requested, if we are successful, and to correspondingly delegate authority again to the monitoring officer to onward grant the relevant portion of that funding to the local authorities to deliver their respective elements of the project. Happy to help with any questions or comments on the whole paper. Thank you.
I just said always in reverse order in terms of the point around the government having their timetable actually. Unhelpful as it is, it doesn't necessarily prevent us taking a decision here today for us to set out, but I support that because I think we should get the decision in principle and then take the necessary actions when we get a decision from government, which hopefully is soon, hopefully is positive. I think so. In terms of the actual item, though, I support the recommendations that are outlined here. There's been a bit of a theme through a number of discussions around the importance of net zero and renewables and so on. There's people in the gallery today who have a keen interest in that, I know. But I think for various reasons, not just jobs, but also the energy savings and the financial savings as well, and all the actions that have been set out in this paper I support and would recommend that we agree here today. Then hopefully we'll get a decision soon and we can actually get properly going with it as soon as possible. I think it's just, again, it's just to underline the point, yeah, it's an important issue for this region. So like that we are taking the steps that are outlined in this paper here today.
I'm very happy to second that.
Yeah.
Councillor.
Any further questions? No? We all content to agree? Yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to pick up on the final item on today's agenda, which is future meeting dates. We have settled on a date. Obviously, you'll appreciate with the mayor having just recently been elected that we've needed to make sure that the schedule of the dates will work as well around the mayor. We have settled on the date of June 26th for the AGM for the combined authority, and at that meeting we will be tabling a schedule of meetings for the combined authority to agree. So it was just.
Okay, so happy with that. Personal feel on behalf of my wife, looking forward to terms in the future, that'd be very helpful. Just also in terms of schedule meeting, again, you know, hanging up on this one, just the schedule for scrutiny and audit, attention, when we're going to see that come forward.
That will come forward at the AGM.
Everyone happy with the date?
Yep.
So, that concludes the item of business of this meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and I'll look forward to seeing you on 26th.
Mr. Mayor, can I make one suggestion? Moving forward, it may be beneficial to people sat in the gallery if we had some acoustic system in place. So the people in the gallery can hear what we're saying rather than to shout. Just a suggestion, that's all.
Yeah.
Everyone will be in a mindset while they're in it.
They wouldn't say that.